Well, welcome everybody to the this evening session of the Padre O'Donnell Forum. And tonight we have Niall Bowen giving us a presentation on the Philippines. And because we've had various technical issues, we're going to start straight into the subject and ask Niall to start his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this subject this evening on behalf of the Petterdon Socialist Republican Forum. This is a subject which is something that I got interested in maybe a number of years ago. I dipped in and out. I remember I visited the Philippines a number of years ago, and there was what brought it to my attention more or less this time last year was the People's State of the Nation address in San Francisco, which was addressed by the president of the San Francisco Labor Council, a man by the name of Mike Casey. Now, he was highlighting the case of Brandon Lee, who is an American citizen of Filipino descent. He was calling for an investigation into the attempted assassination of Brandon Lee, which took place a number of years previous. Now, Brandon Lee was out in the Philippines and was attempted to was shot by assailants on a moped, and he's now been left paralyzed since that. Now, what Brandon Lee was out there was he was out as a human rights doing the work of human rights. He had taken over actually from the work of his predecessor, a man by the name of William Brigatti, who was shot dead in 2014 in very similar circumstances. These are people that are going out and they are becoming a thorn in the side, really, of the Filipino state, highlighting injustices with particularly within the working class. The area that this took place in was an island, the island of Negros, which is primarily a sugar producing island. So that got me interested in it. And as I was putting together a piece on Brandon Lee, this attack happened this year on the 19th of April, where two other American citizens were shot dead by state forces by the Filipino army in an operation carried out. Those killings took place in an area known as Toboso, and those killings are known as the Toboso killings. Now, the two American citizens was Lyle Pugoles, who was a friend of Brandon Lee's, and he was also from San Diego on the West Coast, and Dana Renee Soam from Washington. Now, they were two unarmed civilians. They were among nine unarmed civilians who were killed by the state forces, along with 10 members of the New People's Army. Now, there's an investigation into these killings. I'm sure we can have a fairly good guess as to where that investigation is going to go. Having said that, we can make a fairly good judgment that the two activists from America were there investigating and learning and researching the plight of the indigenous workers in that area. Now, as I say, that area, the Philippines is made up, obviously, of, if anyone knows the area, it's made up of a number of small islands. The area in which this attack took place was in Negros Occidental, which is in the western part of the island of Negros. Now, there's many ways in which the Philippines are exploited through mining and through all different types of things. Now, this particular island is one of the largest sugar producers of the Philippines, and it produces up to 60% of the entire sugar for the Filipino economy. From there, then we sort of go back as to where the bullets are originated from, and obviously they originated from the guns of the Filipino army, which is as we know, is a huge ally of the United States. Now, that's happened on the eve of what is known as the Balakatan operation, which is an operation that takes place on a yearly basis in conjunction with the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and it's basically a military exercise, war games, which tests out the how well the military would cope in that area, in that sea. Strategically, we know where that is. It's near China, and that's probably what the United States are planning for with these military exercises. But it's worth, I think, the whole idea of why we're here this evening talking about it is because it's worth going back into the history of the farmers and the working class more generally within the Philippines. And so I went back. Obviously, the Philippines was an old Spanish colony, and the Spanish had invaded it in the 1500s, and they brought in, like they had done with Spanish imperialism and the Spanish Empire in many countries throughout the world, and they brought in Christianity to the Philippines. And as the religious orders arrived, so too were they allocated land by the Spanish colonial settlers, and then through that then you had what was more of a communal economy before the arrival of the Spanish, but now you had the Spanish settling up and more or less exploiting the farmers and extracting the natural resources from the land for exports into the Asian and European markets. So from that there, you had where they had to have done this throughout countries throughout the world that brought in the systems of transport and railway systems. So out of that there, you would have got more or the introduction of urbanization, really urban areas towards the end of the 1800s. With that, then you had for the first time in the Philippines this creation really of this middle class in these more urban areas where they along these transport routes. So what happened was then the middle class would have sent their children off to study overseas, and that would have brought back these ideas really of nationalism and communal activists that could see the injustice that was taking place. So you would have got then at the end of the 1800s, you would have got the first call really through these activists for land reform, and it was a man by the name of Jose Rizal, who is remembered even today amongst the workers, amongst the peasant class, as the sort of pioneer behind the first movement towards land reform. So he had taken his landlord tenants, which I think was the Dominican church at the time. He had taken them to court, and he had won his case he had successfully fought his case against his landlords. Now the Dominicans they went and appealed that, and under appeal, then the case was thrown out. Once the dust had settled, then the Spanish, which they had known to do in many other countries, that went in and burnt all the farms and evicted all the farmers from that. They're basically sending out a message to say we're not going to allow this to happen again. The history and the theme, the repeated theme throughout the past century of the Philippines is that no matter what they do, the workers have become undeterred. Jose Rizal was undeterred, and he went on to eventually to keep fighting for land reform until his eventual execution at the hands of the Philippine at the Spanish colonialists towards the end of the 1800s. The other theme of this is the decline really of the Spanish Empire towards the end of the 1800s, and the emergence of this new empire, which we are seeing today, which was the United States. We had the Spanish-American War towards the end of the 1800s, and maybe the Spanish sort of maybe seeing the writing on the wall and not prepared to meet the Americans in the theater of war, which happened to be the Philippines. The Americans and the Spanish done a deal where the Americans effectively purchased the Philippines from the Spanish. Since then, really, it's been an American colony, and we can see the hangover really from all of that today. The U.S. had pledged really to buy 10% of the land, the 10% that was owned by the church, and the United States had done a deal with the Church of Rome at the time to buy the land back, and that was seen by the Filipino nationals at the time, that was seen as this was a new way of that the land was going to be transferred back into their ownership. Of course, it never happened. In 1909, then the United States passed the Pan-Aldrich Tariff Act, which allowed the duty-free importation of 300,000 tons of sugar into the US from the Philippines. Now that's tariff-free sugar, 300,000 tons before they would have to pay any tariff. Now, if you consider it the early 1900s, the massive impact and the massive importation of sugar into the United States, suppose you can think of the likes of Coca-Cola and all that there. So we tend now maybe not to see sugar as maybe a massive economic driver in any sense, but at the time it really was. That was the beginning of the privatized companies really from America going into the Philippines and extracting all of the natural resources out and back into the United States. Were the farmers going to benefit from that? Absolutely not. And there was never any notion that the United States would do that. Again, the calls for land reform never ceased. They kept on going. The Rice Share Tenancy Act of 1933 was passed, which promised genuine reform. Now, this was back in 1933, prior to the Second World War and the invasion of Japan into the Philippines. So it was going to establish a 50-50 crop sharing division with an annual interest rate and advances of loans given to the tenants by the landlords. But obviously the tenants it was on the pretense that they could effectively buy the land, but in reality they couldn't. Who could buy the land? The emergence of the capitalist class in the United States, which effectively went in and bought all this private land, which the Americans could say, well, we did offer to you, could have bought it, but obviously they didn't have the money to do it. So it's been that sort of way. That's the way that these land reforms have been promised. Well, you had your land reform, we give you this act, but nothing really of any note really materialized. We've seen that throughout the past century, and it's been a case of promise after promise. We were given the promise of independence really just prior to the Second World War. It never materialized. After the Second World War, whenever the Japanese left, what you had was the American military staying there, the CIA having a large presence there as well, and they have been there at any stage since that to counter any revolutions that have taken place since that, and that's led to many massacres down through the years from the state forces that you probably never really heard of. The president Marcos was overthrown in 1986, which was seen as the sort of the people power revolution. And it was one of the catalysts for this massive peaceful uprising, and that came about from after an anti-President Marcos opposition leader Bendigo Aquino was assassinated in 1983. So you've seen this sort of peaceful uprising throughout the 80s, which led to this new government that being in place. Again, land reform was promised but never was delivered on. And this led then to on the 22nd of January 1987 to the Mendolia massacre. Again, you're seeing anytime land reform, it's promised. Once the practicalities and once they're asking for, well, when's it going to be delivered? It never is. Why does this interest us? Well, I guess there's nobody in Ireland at the minute being assassinated. We're very happy to say that. but there are the echoes of this imperialism in Ireland at the minute, with large companies, mining companies coming in from Canada, from America, and they are stripping away the rights of those who are looking after, are defenders of the land. The state really does very little about it. There's a Canadian mining firm in the Philippines at the minute. One of the more critical minerals, I'm sort of focused more on the sugar end of things, but wider within the Philippines, what you have is a large nickel and copper reserves. Those are one of the main materials that go into the electric cars. So you'll see now there's a Canadian firm called Oceanic Gold, which is also in there, and they're mining for gold. And there is no prospect at the minute of any land reform coming in. And you can see now that even whenever American citizens are going in to research this, they're being slaughtered, and you're not hearing about it on the news. Because this is one of America's strategic allies. They rely on them for a lot of imports. They rely on their private companies going in to extract the materials, but they also rely on the Philippines for that strategic area within the South China Sea, which will become more significant as the United States agitate more for war against China and more supremacy within that area over the next 5 to 10 years. That's in a nutshell, that's basically what, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to open up for a wider discussion, but that's the reason that I am highlighting this and trying to bring that is because there's lessons in the Philippines for us and anywhere else in the world to learn. So I'm happy to open it up for a wider discussion. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Is Alan
The
there?
usual thing now is for Barry to give us an overall commentary. Shall we proceed in that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Philippines is just really the outworking of what we have seen in Ireland for 800 odd years now. They've seen invasion, they've seen their people, they've seen their resources stolen, and atrocity after atrocity. If we trace back to the early days of Irish history from the 11th century and the 16th century, we see exactly what was happening in Ireland is what happened in the Philippines. And the outworking of that, of course, is that people under oppression will resist, and that has happened. With the New People's Army, which was formed in about 1969 and is still going to the present day, the colonisation of land and the stealing of resources is still happening in Ireland today. We don't see it in a physical way. We don't see it possibly, with the same violence that would have happened in the earlier years of the invasions of Ireland. It's still there, and we have mining companies in Ireland taking out, or at least attempting to take out resources and leave behind a mess, which is happening in the Philippines and all over the world in places like Africa and anywhere else that mineral resources can be found. And this is the outworking of imperialism. It was the outworking of Spanish imperialism in the first instance. And the lad who done the first world circumnavigation, Ferdinand Magellan, I just watched a program about him there recently. In the 1600s, he was heading for the Spice Islands, and spices at the time were much more valuable than gold. I think maybe 5 times or maybe 10 times more valuable than gold at the time. Now, he ended up in the Philippines because he had totally misjudged his journey, and he ended up in the Philippines and actually was killed in the Philippines as it happened. Just like Columbus going into the Americas, none of these things was anything to do with the civilization of the natives or had any benign reasons of discovery. It was all about, and has been the case in the case of the Philippines and other countries, has been the case, as I said at the outset, of removing resources. In the case of Africa, kidnapping people to work the coffee fields and the cotton fields in America. And all of this is related to the power of imperialism and the need for capitalism to find resources and find markets. And that's the explanation that covers and makes it understandable of why what happened in the Philippines, as Niall pointed out, happened. It's not benign. It's not, the Spanish weren't there for some benign reason. Ferdinand Magellan wasn't there for a benign reason either, and neither were the Japanese, and certainly not the Yanks. And the Yanks have now an added impetus in the sense that they want to use that as a springboard and a jumping off position to attack China when the time is right. Iran first, Russia next, and then China. That's the plan. We need to see these things in this context to ever understand why they happen or what possibly is the reasons for them.
Thanks, Barry. I think it's worth noting as well that we know little enough about the massacre that took place earlier this year in April this year. We do know that the current president of the Philippines is our former president of the Philippines is a lady by the name of Corazon Aquino. Now, she owns one of these haciendas. Now, the hacienda system was brought in by the Spanish. It's still there today. Now, the hacienda, for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically a large area of land that's owned by a family. It's handed down from family to generations. So they just maintain that wealth within the family. And another theme that runs through the research that goes into the Philippines is the same names keep coming up. They're knocking about all over the place. So power just remains within the same family structures, and so too to the peasant class and to the working class. They remain. So they're stuck in this perpetual system where they are constantly farming, constantly selling, but the state is giving them basically buttons for what they are for what they're producing. So they remain in that in that impoverished state. Now, during the research, what I found was one of the fellas that was killed on the 19th of April was a fellow by the name of Earl Wendell. We don't know a lot about what comes out of the Philippines, but what we do know is that Earl Wendell, who was shot by the state forces and killed, he was there on Aquino's hacienda back on the 6th of November in 2004, and he was organizing the workers within that hacienda for an increase in workers' rights. And what happened was there was 327 workers and union officials had went on official strike within Aquino's hacienda work farm, basically. And this was a standoff that went on for days and weeks until eventually on the 16th of November, which was about 10 days after the start of the strike, the state forces went in and opened fire on the striking workers, and they killed 7 union workers, and they wounded over 100 men, women, and children. Earl Wendell, that was back in 2004. So Earl Wendell, one of the men that was killed, was one of the organizing union workers that was there that day, and he's survived up until now, 20 years later, and he has eventually been killed as well. For me, that is typical, and it sort of signifies that they're being shot, but they don't have any choice only to keep organizing and making the case for land reform. They don't have any other choice. And it keeps getting promised them, but it never happens. And this is happening. They've done it peacefully, they've done it democratically, and it's still not being produced. And it's under the gaze of, and it's under the nose of our great ally, the United States of America, who's allowing all this to happen. So I just wanted to make that wee point as well after what Barry said there. Do you have your hand up there, Cormac or Fidelma?
I didn't really know much about the Philippines, Niall, until you told us a bit. No, and there are, so many like comparisons, like we were the only country in Europe that was colonized. I suppose the capitalist system, the economy, and I suppose I was thinking too the plantation of Ulster, the settlers and all that. But what came into my head was it's really now a new type of colonization by these corporations that are coming in. And whenever you think that 27% of the land in the Republic of Ireland has been given out to mining companies, and 25% of land in the north of Ireland has been given out to mining companies. So that's more than a quarter of the whole island has now been given out in prospecting licenses to mining companies. And we learned in 2018 because we sent 2 people over to the prospector, PDAC, Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. And it's an annual global mining conference is held in Toronto. And our 2 people were shocked to find that the 2 governments, North and South, were working hand in glove, and they were inviting mining companies to Ireland, and they were offering them incentives, relaxed permitting, procedures, environmental procedures. They were giving them tax concessions. They were offering them 100% write-off on their development and exploration costs, and 120% on their capital costs. Not as good as RHI, but nearly. And, it was absolutely shocking to hear, and the maps of Ireland. I mean, this was in one way, the funny thing. There was no borders shown on any of the maps. So it was come to Ireland, it was shown in the TELUS survey that showed where the minerals and metals could be found, and these were given free. Apparently, Ireland is the most mapped country in the world. It was absolutely shocking, to see that that Ireland was being sold off to mining companies. So that's the new wave of colonisation that's happening here. And when we compare, like, if you say 25% of the whole island, compared to Scotland is next, 7.7% of the land in Scotland, 6.4% of the land in Wales, and Whitford, 0.2% of the land in England has been given out. And so we're we do feel we're the sacrificial, community. And I remember there was a nun in Cork, Sister Magella, God rest her, she died, it's probably 2 years ago now. And she was a great character, and in her mid-80s. She'd been out in Kenya and had worked with Ken Sarawiwi and the 9 people that were executed there, the Ogoni 9. But when she came back, she was involved, and she was originally from Fermanagh, Barry.
Yeah.
And but she ended up in Cork in a convent there. But we would have visited her, and she was constantly sending us emails and pushing us on, to do this, do that, and giving us great words of advice and stuff. But she said to us that about being at the sacrificial community and being politically abandoned. We hadn't really thought about that, but whenever she said to us, about it, we realised, because traditionally our area would have been a Republican area, because it was one of the I suppose poor, you would say, areas in the north, and over the years it would have been represented by Sinn Féin. But I remember in 2015 we asked for a meeting, and we were told by Pat Doherty, who was the MP at that stage, that it was too far gone, and that this would be good for the area to bring jobs and wealth. And we were quite shocked, about it. We were shocked when he said that. Now, that was 2015. Well, thank God now we're 2026, and Dalradian still haven't, got planning permission. But, we feel now we can't trust one political party, because they all speak out of the 2 sides of their mouths. We have spoken to quite a few of them, and there would be some of them would tell us they're completely supportive to us. They believe it's bad for the environment and bad for the health of the mining. But on the other hand, there'd be other members of their party, would say, oh, it's good for the area. And people feel that now they have to speak for themselves And I mean, I do believe it'll all be people power that will, I mean, it's up to the people to protect the area, to protect the land and the water and the air and people's health. It's the future generations who are going to suffer if we don't, do something. But I was just going to say one other thing was that even some of the policies that the company employs, like divide and conquer. I mean, we all know about it. And this company came in and they befriended, or let's say, people of influence in the community, and give out gifts of money and that, and it's divided the community. And this was a rural, close-knit community. And now it's sort of divided those who support the gold mine and those who oppose the gold mine. And that's, and it is horrible because, it's, just people that once were our friends are no longer our friends and that. And then we learned again from speaking to during the COVID period, and when we learned to do Zoom meetings and linked in with groups in other countries in the world, particularly in Latin American countries. And sorry, I was going to say one of the other places was Papua New Guinea, where Oceania Gold is there as well.
Yep.
And it was, when you mentioned, I didn't know they were in the Philippines as well. But in European countries like Spain, Greece, Finland, Romania, all those countries, had the gold mine. But anyhow, we had learned from Carlos Sorilla in Ecuador, I think he was from Ecuador, about the mining companies criminalize people who oppose them, who are protectors of the environment. And, I suppose at that time initially, and they told us about people in their communities, particularly in Latin American countries, who were, they were murdered, they were disappeared, women were raped, and they were put off their land and all that. And, and I suppose part of me at the time thought, oh, well, that's, they're the global south and they're poor countries and, we're more advanced. Like that wouldn't happen here. In 2019, the police arrived here to tell Cormac that there was a credible death threat against him and two other men in our community who are also opposed to the gold mining. The police delivered the same message to them, told us to take security measures, etc., and couldn't give us any information whether it was an individual, an organisation, was it a letter, was it a phone call. They just said they had been asked to deliver this by their sergeant, and we couldn't get any further information. So we were quite shocked at that. But then there was other incidences like where, and now, I suppose I would feel maybe murder bids where employees of the gold mining company have knocked people down, sent them across bonnets of cars, hit them with vans, hit them with tractors, tried to run them down. And, that, and then physical attacks, again, men being, beaten, like I'm thinking of two men in particular who were beat up by employees of the company. And luckily one was caught on camera. I'm thinking there was three actually. One was caught in a shop where he was punched, and it was caught on the CCTV cameras. So, and he didn't retaliate or anything. So, at least that one. But again, the police came to the man and said, oh, he apologizes. They weren't going to initially, charge him, but the man said that, he didn't accept any apology. I mean, at the end of the day, he was hit 5 times, and I think eventually the man might have been fined £200, the man that did the punching. But again, a supporter of Dalradian. And there was, the different things like threatening phone calls we have got here. They told us they'd put our sons in body bags. Sex calls, all the like cyberbullying on all the time, and again being followed at night in the car and wondering who it was, and things like that, and people deviating into side roads thinking, oh no, they couldn't be following me because I'll take this, I'll go off the main road or I'll go on this side road, and then the person follows you and you're a bit getting more worried because they're coming closer. So there's all that, and people told us. We had people over last year Trócaire has recently, I mean, initially when we contacted Trócaire, they were saying, oh, we're an overseas development organisation. But in the last few years, they've been actually very good to us, and they have been bringing people over from Honduras, Guatemala, other countries, and then getting us to meet them and sharing information, strategies, and or whatever, And they told us I was saying, like, the things that were happening to us were very minor compared to what happened to them. And they said this was how it started with them. It was the minor things, So they were saying, no, don't disregard it. It's so just those sort of policies. It's hard to believe in this, a day and age, and you'd say we're in a modern, first world country and all that, but you just don't know what to expect. And government departments, we just can't rely on them. I mean, I used to think they were there to protect us. I used to think that politicians were there to protect us and for the good of the people. But now I know very different. And I do believe it's all about money and greed. That's just and profit. That's what it's about. And they have no regard for people or the environment.
No, you're 100%, you're 100% right. Fidelma, and the parallels are there. The parallels do exist between, okay, we're in a very privileged position now. We're not being assassinated, but we are being intimidated. And it's within our own lifetime, it's within our own memory that we had elements of the state going around with balaclavas on, and they were assassinating civilians within our own community and the state. And that's the parallel that we see now within this one case within the Philippines. So we have the likes of Brandon Lee that has been shot by an assailant on the back of a moped that has disappeared into the night in sympathy with the state. And we have the state forces in an official capacity also mowing down members of the state. We're in quite a privileged position now for that it's not happening. That's not to say it won't happen, because we know that it has happened before. And it's not without outside the realms of possibility that we could see it again. And that's why we need to be vigilant. And that's why, in my opinion, we have to draw the parallels with what we're experiencing here in Ireland, down through the southern hemisphere, through South America, and within the Philippines and Papua New Guinea, with all the common denominator is these private companies from Canada, from America, from all these here, and it's all to do with capitalism. It's all to do with profit, and it's all to do with money. They'll extract all your land, poison it, and then disappear into the night with the profits underneath their arm. So the parallels are there, and that's why I brought us all together here this evening, because they are significant parallels, which is worth us discussing and to discuss further going forward as well.
Well, even multinationals or employers within Ireland, I think they only employ something like 7% of the Irish population.
Yeah.
But I mean, they export profits worth billions out of Ireland all the time. So I mean, the exploitation goes on right under our noses each and every day. It's not violence. It's not violence as we know it, but it's the violation of a country's sovereignty by exporting the profits. At any given moment's notice, when they decide that the country, Ireland, is no longer the most profitable place to be for them, they'll just up and leave, just like the mining companies. I mean, it's mining that's to the foreground today because it's such a dirty industry, and because of the dirty tricks that are obviously being played by Dalradian and all other mining companies. But even just what seems like innocent employment isn't innocent employment. The other thing about it is that most of these companies, they do not allow unions of any kind, so workers don't have the rights that workers should have, and neither would the workers in Dalradian either, if that mine ever opened.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not getting a job in Dalradian if you are, first of all, if you are in the mainframe where you would be attempting to unionize your workforce, and they pick their workforce quite carefully, I'm sure. And they pick as Fidelma has already said, they pick their influential people within the communities very carefully as well. And the divide and conquer that they've practiced throughout Romania, throughout Europe, and throughout the other countries that are well documented, and we know well about it. It's only about trying to highlight that further and to bring it to the attention of more people into the future. If anyone else has anything to say there, just raise your hand. We're going on to maybe just less than an hour. If anyone else has anything they want to say, or otherwise we'll wrap it up. Owen Harris, you have the floor. You're just muted there at the minute.
I suppose.
Owen, if you just want to sort your, if you want to maybe get into a bit of better signal, and I'll just bring Alan in, and then I'll bring you back in, Owen, in a couple of minutes, if that's all right. Alan, did you want to say something?
Well, a couple of things. One is that I just typed into this search engine Orion resources and Philippines, and of course they are operating in the Philippines. I didn't take it that any further, but the Orion resources is the parent company of the Aradia, and I in preparation for trying to help the Fidelma and Cormax campaign, did some research, and they are everywhere, all over the world, and they're constantly involved in disputes, breaking agreements, polluting, breaking, sacking, alleged violence. The other thing about the when I was reading your document is another small parallel that I noticed between Ireland and the Philippines, and that was this process that didn't seem to proceed quite normally, quite straightforwardly in the Philippines, whereby the government, British government, in the end decided to, I've even forgotten the names of these agreements, but anyway, to give grants to small farmers to allow them to buy their land, and then to long-term pay back the government. And then the landowners got big lumps of cash, and then the peasants were technically given ownership of the land, but on the basis of a sort of 20-30 year repayment process. They used exactly the same technique in the Philippines, only they didn't carry it through from what you're saying, that they put various clauses in. The Philippines seems to be, is a very disunified country with lots of regions and administrations, and those administrations are very interlinked with the rich and the landowners and violence. So it wasn't carried through in the same way. And from what I understand, is whereas we went through a phase where there was a big improvement, the Philippines was never allowed to do that. Now they're saying the people remain poor, and the whole land situation is desperate and feudal. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Alan. Owen, are you there? Do you want to say a few words there, Owen Harris?
Sorry there, my phone is playing up a bit. Is that any better?
That's better, Owen. Yeah, go on ahead. We can hear you now, lad.
Yeah, I suppose, it's to bring it back home as well, that, we have 25% of our electricity now is going to data centers. So it's a relentless drive by the imperialists to take all of our land, our water, our resources, and we will be paying for it. We're fighting a gas terminal down here in County Kerry, Shannon LNG, and it's the import American fracked gas. There's been lots of kind of down through the years, we've had to deal with different things, like, they'd promised the village all these jobs and get people on side that way. You'd also have kind of, we'll say, international advocates, NGOs. They can really, there's a lot of players there that can really destroy a campaign. We had, infiltrate a campaign, divide people, and this can be by accident, but I don't know. Lately we had an offer about a philanthropic fund. This was taken now without my knowledge or consent. but the people were convinced that this money would help the campaign. So they took it. We're still kind of deciding. I can't be in a campaign with this money. It comes from Rockefeller, Soros, Zionists as well. There's a lot of people there. They're a bit naive about that. I would say that the person who brought it to the campaign, we have a very big problem with a colonial inferiority complex here in Ireland, where we think these foreigners, German or American, and they come in real like they're professional activists. And I've often went to this guy, a German anti-fossil fuel advocate, and he knows a lot about the industry and that. So I'd often ask him a question, but there's imperial drives, and people can play a role they don't even know they're playing. I went back, and it's ideology a lot of the time. I went back and looked at his Twitter feed, and you had things like sanction Russia and fuck Hamas and all of this, and you're thinking, this guy is trying to fight US LNG terminals in his country and internationally, but he's shouting to sanction Russia. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. I think when we're fighting these extractive, imperialist driven industries, it's always important to keep with our own context, our own struggle at home, and relate it, not let a fight get caught up with these players who have many motives we don't know.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And there's lessons to be learned from that as well. And as I say, there's lessons to be learned within our own island and from further afield. And I think the point of this evening and the point of all activities going forward is that we can unite and we can come together and we can reach out to other people throughout the world who are suffering in the same way and learn from each other, because that's what the companies and the mining companies and the capitalist companies, they learn from their mistakes, they learn from where they've went wrong in the past, and they know now to go in and to befriend and to bribe the as Fidelma says, the influential people within the communities, and divide and conquer. So these are lessons that we can learn all the time. Look, I think that was a very worthwhile discussion, and I don't know if you agree. I'm sure you do, but I just want to thank everybody for taking part in this discussion this evening. I wish the comrades in the Sperrins all the best in their public inquiry. We support you 100% and only for you. We don't even know what sort of state the Sperrins would be in. Only for you, for all we know, the mining company could have been and went and left the Sperrins, like they've left so many other places, poisoned across the globe. They have left scars all over the earth, all over the globe. And if it wasn't them, it was possibly somebody else doing it with a different name, but with the same agenda, with the same purpose, which was to drive profit and to exploit the ground from underneath their feet. So again, just want to show our solidarity to yourselves and the Sperrins and support you all the way.
Thanks very much, Niall, and everybody. And that.
Great. Thank you all very much. I'm gonna.
The battle goes on.
The battle goes on, of course.